Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. Today we're diving into a deeply mysterious and heartbreaking case that left the South Korean public in tears for the young woman at the center of it all. The complexity of this case has been described as like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. So what exactly happened? Let's begin. This is one of the last known photos of Lee Yunhi, a radiant 29-year-old woman, loved by friends and full of dreams. Born and raised in Namyangju, South Korea, she studied at one of Seoul's most prestigious universities, Ewha Women's University, where she double majored in fine arts and statistics. However, after graduation, Yoon-hee realized that neither path truly spoke to her passion. Aside from her family, what she loved most in life was animals. She owned 2 dogs that she treated like her own children, and she spent most of her free time watching nature documentaries, visiting zoos, farms, and wildlife conservation centers. Her love for animals grew so strong that at 25, an age when many would say it's too late to start over, Yoon-hee made a bold decision. She was going to become a veterinarian. Her family was strongly against it. They believed that chasing a dream at that age was foolish, a waste of time and money. A woman at that stage in life, they said, should be thinking about marriage and settling down. But Yoon-hee was a modern, independent, and intelligent woman. She ignored their objections and enrolled in the College of Veterinary Medicine at Jeonbuk National University. 3 years later, in 2006, she was just 1 semester away from earning her degree. She was in the thick of preparing for her final exams. To pay for tuition and living expenses, Yoon-hee also worked part-time tutoring students, some of them children of the university's own professors. She wasn't just a model student, she was kind, self-reliant, and hard-working. No one could have predicted that just days later, her promising life would come to a sudden, tragic halt. June 2nd, what started as an ordinary day, would mark the beginning of a chilling chain of events. That afternoon, after finishing a tutoring session for a professor's child, Yoon-hee was walking home along a familiar street when 2 men on a motorbike suddenly sped up and snatched her handbag. Inside were her wallet, ID cards, and most importantly, her cell phone. 2 witnesses saw the robbery happen and immediately gave chase in their car. They managed to follow the motorbike for a few blocks, but the thieves turned into a narrow alley and vanished without a trace. That night, Yoon-hee returned to the university, visibly shaken. She told her friends she wouldn't be reachable by phone for a while. Her voice trembled as she said, "Just thinking about those bastards makes me want to cry. This world is terrifying." What she didn't know was that the truly terrifying part was yet to come. 3 days later, June 5th, was the final practicum of the semester. Veterinary students were required to perform a live animal surgery, a high-stakes skills assessment. After completing the procedure, the class, students and faculty alike, went out for a celebratory dinner just off campus. At first, Yoon-hee seemed hesitant. She felt she hadn't done well during the surgery and had been seen crying in the lab's restroom. But after some encouragement from her friends, she finally agreed to join the party. The celebration started at a karaoke bar around 10 p.m. According to her classmates, Yoon-hee gradually cheered up and even looked like she was enjoying herself. Later, the entire group, more than 40 people, headed to a nearby bar. They ate, drank, chatted, and reminisced about their college memories. Everyone thought it was just a typical, carefree night. But around 2 a.m., Yoon-hee walked out of the bar's restroom looking pale and visibly shaken. Without saying a word, she quietly left the gathering without saying goodbye. A 27-year-old male student known as Kim noticed something was off. He quickly followed her. Yoon-hee and Kim were close. They had known each other since before college. Concerned for her safety, he wanted to know what had happened. When he asked, Yoon-hee replied, "Someone followed me into the restroom." But she didn't elaborate. Yoon-hee lived alone in a small apartment in Gyeonggi Province, about a mile from the bar. Worried, Kim offered to carry her backpack and walk her home, something he had done many times before after group outings. They walked together until they reached a dark alley near her apartment. There, Yoon-hee stopped and said, "This is my stop." She signaled to Kim that he didn't need to walk her all the way to the door. They said goodbye. She disappeared into the shadows. Kim turned to leave but felt uneasy, so he looked back. When he saw the lights inside her apartment switch on, he sighed in relief and headed home. He lived nearby as well. June 6th was Memorial Day in South Korea, a national holiday. With everyone off work, no one noticed that Yoon-hee had gone unusually quiet. Not hearing from her that day didn't raise alarms. People assumed she was resting after a stressful semester. But on June 7th, when Yoon-hee didn't show up for class, the questions started. For someone as diligent and punctual as Yoon-hee, an unexplained absence was concerning. After class, her close friend Minji decided to check on her. She went to Yoon-hee's apartment and knocked repeatedly. There was no response, no footsteps, no sound from inside. Her phone, of course, was unreachable. It had been stolen days earlier. Minji figured Yoon-hee might just be exhausted and needed a day to herself, so she left. But by June 8th, when Yoon-hee still hadn't shown up to class or attended any of the events she had promised to join, concern turned into panic. 4 close friends, including Minji and Kim, returned to her apartment. This time, when they knocked, the first thing they heard was barking from inside. Yoon-hee had 2 dogs, her beloved babies she adored. None of the friends knew the code to her digital lock. Minji called Yoon-hee's older sister, hoping she could help, but no luck. Her sister hadn't heard from her in days and didn't know the door code either. With no other option, the group contacted the police. The police reached out to the landlord. With the family's consent, they opened Lee Yunhi's apartment. And the moment the door swung open, they were hit with a nauseating stench. A sickening mix of urine, dog feces, and the unmistakable smell of something decaying, of life left behind. Yoon-hee's 2 dogs were lying limp on the floor, weak from hunger and thirst. The small apartment was a mess. Papers had been chewed up, clothes were scattered everywhere. Every corner of the room hinted at distress and abandonment. Strangely, a bundle of dried flowers that had once been hung high on the wall, well out of the dog's reach, was now lying on the ground. Yoon-hee's backpack, the one she had taken with her to the party that night, was there too, an important detail, as it confirmed that she had returned home. Inside the bag were 2 syringes and a vial of animal anesthetic, items taken from the university's veterinary lab. The apartment was chaotic, but there were no signs of a struggle. No blood, nothing stolen, no indication of forced entry. And so, police made their initial assessment, a conclusion that shocked everyone. Maybe she just left for a while to get some rest. But this theory was full of holes. Anyone who truly knew Yoon-hee would understand. She would never leave her dogs uncared for. She would never disappear without telling someone. Her friends, especially Minji and Kim, refused to accept such a shallow explanation. Why didn't anyone, family or friends, receive even a single message, a note, or a sign that she had intended to leave? Right after the police left, Kim and Minji decided to stay behind in the apartment to wait for Yoon-hee's parents. Soon after, her older sister arrived. While walking around the apartment, she noticed a cigarette butt on the balcony railing. Thinking it belonged to her sister, and not wanting their parents to find out Yoon-hee might have started smoking, she quickly threw it away. No one knows for certain whether that cigarette was actually Yoon-hee's. But if it had belonged to someone else, the DNA on that cigarette could have been the key to identifying who was with her that night. But now, it was gone, discarded forever. Then they did what any well-meaning but untrained person might do. They started cleaning up. The police had given no instructions to preserve the scene. Everyone present, Kim, Minji, and Yoon-hee's sister, would later express deep regret. But in that moment, they were only thinking, this place is too dirty for her parents to see. They didn't consider forensic evidence. They didn't think of preserving a potential crime scene. And while confusion still hung in the air, Yoon-hee's parents stepped into the apartment. Right away, her father, Lee Dong-se, noticed something strange. A hammer that was always kept in plain sight was missing. He remembered giving that hammer to Yoon-hee for small household repairs. It was a familiar item, and she always kept it in the same spot. But now it was gone. The second missing item was her small coffee table, one of her favorite pieces of furniture. She used it for meals, studying, and even as a bedside stand. A male friend, referred to as S, had visited her apartment the morning of June 5th and had helped fix one of its loose legs. He confirmed that Yoon-hee had never intended to get rid of that table, so why was it no longer there? Soon after, while wandering around the apartment complex in search of clues, Mr. Lee made a startling discovery. The tabletop had been discarded between two trash bins, mixed in with other pieces of unwanted furniture. All four legs had been unscrewed, possibly with a screwdriver, and were nowhere to be found. It was possible that a homeless person had taken them to sell for scrap. But why was only the tabletop left behind? That remains a mystery. Mr. Lee began to speculate. Either the table had been damaged during a struggle, or, something far more chilling, it may have carried evidence, blood, fingerprints, or the DNA of the perpetrator, prompting him to dispose of it. He also started to believe that the hammer he had once given his daughter may have been the murder weapon, and after the act, the killer took it with him to hide the evidence. But at this point, those were only theories. The crime scene had been contaminated. Crucial evidence had been cleaned, thrown away, or moved out of place. On June 10th, 4 days after Yoon-hee vanished, the police finally classified her case as a serious missing person investigation. A special task force was assembled with a clear mission: to bring Yoon-hee home at any cost. When investigators returned to her apartment, they found that almost all forensic value had been lost. With no other option, the police resorted to old-school methods, going door to door, knocking on every unit, questioning each resident in the building. They hoped someone might have heard or seen something on that fateful night, but all they met was silence. None of the cooperative neighbors recalled anything unusual that night. More troubling, several residents flat out refused to speak with investigators. They closed their doors, stayed quiet, or claimed they didn't know anything. However, one woman did come forward. She shared that a few days before Yoon-hee disappeared, she had been followed by a strange man right outside her apartment. He looked young, quiet, and gave off a threatening vibe. She was so frightened by the idea that he was waiting for her to open the door so he could rush in that she turned around and shouted at him. Startled, he ran away. She didn't know who the man was, but suspected he might have switched his focus from her to Yoon-hee. In South Korea, cases of women being stalked aren't uncommon, especially in apartment complexes with poor security and thin walls. There have even been instances where intruders burst into homes in the middle of the night just because the door wasn't locked in time. Still, while the stalker theory seemed plausible, statistics showed a different reality. Most missing person cases involve someone the victim already knows. And so, the investigation shifted back to the list of 40 people who had attended the June 5th party. One by one, each person was brought in for questioning, investigators hoping someone might have seen or heard something after Yoon-hee left the bar. Only one person offered a substantial account: Kim. He told them he was the last one to see Yoon-hee that night. He had walked her to the alley near her apartment and saw her lights turn on before he left. Kim, along with 21 others, was then asked to take a polygraph test. All 22 passed without any issues. Amid countless dead ends and faint leads, investigators decided to turn their attention to Yoon-hee's personal computer. And that's where they uncovered a chilling discovery. According to recovered data, at exactly 2:59 a.m. on June 6th, just minutes after Kim had walked her to the alley near her apartment, her computer was powered on. Someone accessed Naver, South Korea's most popular search engine, and typed in the keywords sexual harassment, contact police, and 112, Korea's emergency hotline. The search session lasted only 3 minutes, ending at 3:02 a.m. The computer was then manually shut down at 4:21 a.m., a strange action, since Yoon-hee typically left her computer in sleep mode. Previous activity logs confirmed this habit. From the timing and nature of the search, investigators believed it was most likely Yoon-hee herself who typed in those words, almost immediately after entering her apartment. With her phone stolen, She may have been trying to report a crime online. But 3 minutes later, something made her stop. On June 8th, between 2:15 p.m. and 5:21 p.m., someone turned her computer back on, not to seek help, but to cover their tracks. The intruder used a specialized program called IE History View to erase the entire chat history from a messaging app called Nadon, a platform similar to Skype. All messages sent or received between 10:48 p.m. on June 4th and 3:04 p.m. on June 8th were completely deleted and rendered unrecoverable. This wasn't your typical browser cleaner. In fact, very few people in South Korea even know it exists. Experts concluded that whoever deleted the data had advanced computer knowledge or, at the very least, was deliberately trying to conceal something. The critical question was, who sat in front of Lee Yunhi's computer that afternoon on June 8th? The astonishing answer, only 2 people were inside the apartment during that time, Kim and Minji, the same friends who had helped clean up the scene. When asked about accessing the computer, both gave the same vague response. I don't really remember. Then, on June 10th, another strange event occurred. Someone logged into Yoon-hee's online music account, checked her email, and viewed her personal messages. Police traced the IP address and found the login came from a motel in Seoul. They immediately reviewed all available security footage, but found no suspicious individual. And of course, there was no sign of Yoon-hee. With all physical evidence compromised, the crime scene thoroughly wiped, and digital data erased beyond recovery, police were forced to face a terrifying possibility. Yoon-hee may have been completely destroyed, not buried in a forest, not hidden underground, but incinerated. To understand this theory, one must know how the veterinary program at Jeonbuk National University, where Yoon-hee studied, handled its practice specimens. Animal cadavers were regularly used for dissection labs. After classes ended, the used animal bodies were sealed in medical waste bags and collected by a contracted company for disposal at a bio-incineration facility. According to internal policy, collection staff were not allowed to open the bags, and truthfully, none of them wanted to. On a normal workday, the facility incinerated roughly 88 pounds of animal remains. But on June 8th, just 2 days after Yoon-hee's disappearance, the total amount incinerated surged to 243 pounds, nearly 3 times the usual amount. Immediately, the chilling question arose. Where did the extra 155 pounds come from? The university later confirmed that no large animal carcasses, such as cows, pigs, or sheep, were processed that day. Only smaller species were handled. So where did the unusually high weight come from? Yoon-hee weighed approximately 100 pounds, and if someone wanted to hide her body by mixing it in with the pile of animal remains, that incineration window would have been the perfect opportunity. No one checked the bags, no one opened them to confirm their contents, and the cremation process would have destroyed everything: blood, DNA, physical trauma, completely wiped out. Even worse, the ashes were disposed of afterward according to procedure. There was nothing left for the police to examine. If this theory was correct, it meant one horrifying possibility. Yoon-hee had been murdered, placed in a medical waste bag like an animal specimen, and incinerated along with the lab animals. And if that were true, then the killer had to be someone with access to the university's biological storage and incineration facilities, not a regular student, but someone with clearance, authority, and the ability to manipulate the disposal process without raising suspicion. The first person to come under scrutiny was one of Yoon-hee's professors, a man known as Professor Moon. He wasn't just her instructor. He was also the one who had asked Yoon-hee to tutor his 2 children, the same tutoring session she had just completed the night her bag was stolen. Multiple students reported that Moon had acted inappropriately toward Yoon-hee in the past. Sometimes it was suggestive teasing, sometimes uncomfortable attempts to get physically close. At the June 5th party, Moon allegedly tried to sit next to Yoon-hee, but she clearly refused and changed seats to avoid him. Her friends recalled her saying, "He's such a creep." More suspiciously, Moon's timeline didn't match up. He initially claimed to have left the party at 2 a.m., but other witnesses stated clearly that he was still there after Lee Yunhi had left the bar. Online forums in South Korea have long speculated, Did Moon assault Yoon-hee in the restroom that night and then follow her home? Fearing she might report him, jeopardizing his career, reputation, or marriage, did he silence her? With his position and connections, Moon had easy access to the university's animal storage area, exactly the place where, if the incineration theory was true, a body could be erased without a trace. Even worse, if Yoon-hee wasn't killed in her apartment, but was forced back into the lab, then she may have been murdered among the anonymous remains of dissected animals and vanished with them in the quiet burn of the furnace. There's also the neighbor's testimony. She had been followed to her door by a young man with cold eyes and predatory behavior. When she confronted him, he fled. But what if, after being rejected, he turned his focus to someone else? Yoon-hee? Then there's the stolen bag, snatched just a day before she disappeared. Many now believe the robbery wasn't about stealing valuables. It may have been a calculated move to obtain personal information. A way to steal keys, an address. In South Korea, it's not uncommon for sexual predators to stalk women, steal their data, and break into their homes, especially when the victim lives alone. If the thief had been targeting Yoon-hee for a while, he may have planned everything in advance. That night, all he needed was to wait, for her to walk home alone without a phone, no way to call for help, and no one around. It was the perfect setup for a predator in the dark. The third theory, the best friend, Kim. Perhaps the most controversial and most familiar suspect was Kim, the friend once described as loyal like a puppy. He was the last person to see Yoon-hee alive. He insisted that he had walked her to the alley near her home and saw the lights in her apartment turn on. He was also present in her apartment during the exact window when her computer data was erased. And most crucially, he lied. Kim had visited Yoon-hee's apartment many times, feeding her dogs, helping with her studies. He knew the door's passcode. Yet, during the June 8th search, he pretended not to know it, forcing police to break in. Why would he lie? Some believe he wanted to downplay the closeness of their relationship and avoid gossip. Others suspect the lie was a calculated move to cover up tampering with evidence. Let's not forget, Minji, the friend who cleaned the scene with Kim, was also in the apartment during the exact time the computer data was deleted. When asked about it, both said the same thing. I don't remember. On the emotional front, it was no secret that Kim had strong feelings for Lee Yunhi. He once said they kissed 4 times, though they never officially dated. She jokingly called him her third dog, loyal, sweet, but still just a friend. Others said he was obsessed. Rumors claimed he collected strands of her hair, kept a journal tracking her behavior, and even transferred schools just to be closer to her. If Yoon-hee had started growing close to another man, such as her friend S, who reportedly had a special bond with her and had repaired her favorite table just hours before she vanished, Kim may have seen that as a threat. If S was the intruder disrupting Kim's invisible bond with Yoon-hee, then the removal and disposal of that very table may have held symbolic meaning, an attempt to erase the presence of another man who had touched her life. A twisted display of possessiveness. Yoon-hee seemed to trust Kim. She even listed him as an emergency contact. But to someone infatuated, trust can quickly become control. Did Yoon-hee have feelings for Kim? Possibly, but not enough to give him her heart. And maybe it was that ambiguity that became the trigger. The brutal truth is, when someone feels they can't have the person they love, they may choose to destroy. Not out of hatred, but from the belief that if they can't be that person's everything, then no one else should be. This case, with its eerie symbols, disturbing silences, and vanishing evidence, is a chilling example of a particular kind of crime. Murder fueled by unrequited love. Years passed, but Yoon-hee's case never faded into obscurity. In 2017, more than a decade after her disappearance, her father, Mr. Lee Dong-si, continued to fight. He staged protests outside the veterinary clinic Kim now ran, holding signs accusing him of murdering his daughter. In response, Kim sued Mr. Lee for defamation. The court ruled in Kim's favor, banning Mr. Lee from approaching the clinic, turning a grieving father seeking justice into a man stripped of his freedom. By then, Kim was married with children and had a stable career. He claimed he was being slandered, smeared by the media, and stood firm in his stance. "I'm innocent." Throughout the entire investigation, Kim was never indicted, and no physical evidence ever linked him to the crime. In fact, the lead detective on the case, who had once placed all suspicion on Kim, later admitted he regretted ignoring other potential leads. Publicly, he stated that he now believed Professor Moon was the more likely suspect, and yet no one was arrested, no one stood trial, no one was ever formally charged. Also, in 2007, Yoon-hee's older sister received a strange phone call from a public payphone in Gwangju. A man's voice said, "Yoon-hee didn't have any money to call, so she asked me to tell you, she misses you very much." The call was quickly traced. The man on the other end was a 27-year-old with severe brain damage, incapable of involvement in any criminal activity. Authorities labeled the call harmless and dismissed it, just like so many other short-lived leads. That same year, a psychic came forward claiming to have contacted Yoon-hee's spirit. They insisted her body had been hidden in a wastewater treatment facility. Police searched the area immediately, but found nothing. Nearly 20 years have passed, and Yoon-hee's case remains unsolved. She's still listed as a missing person, though most people silently accept the truth. She's no longer alive. The real questions are, where is her body? And who took her life? In their relentless search for answers, her family sold nearly all of their possessions and offered a reward of 100 million won, approximately $73,000 to anyone who could provide information leading to Yoon-hee's discovery. To this day, no one has come forward. Her elderly father, Mr. Lee Dong-se, is now 88 years old. In a recent interview, he tearfully said, "I don't know how much longer this old body of mine will last, but before I die, I just want to know one thing. Is my daughter alive or not?" The case of Lee Yunhi has no ending. It's a jigsaw puzzle of scattered pieces, contradictory testimonies, and 3 names that have echoed for nearly 2 decades. A predatory professor with a history of harassment and access to the university's animal cremation facilities. A cold-eyed stalker who may have picked his target under the cover of night. A trusted best friend who walked her home, was present when her computer data was erased, and helped clean up the scene. So what do you think? Was the killer one of these 3? Or someone else entirely? Or could the most shocking twist be this? That Lee Yunhi was the mastermind behind her own disappearance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care and goodbye.